Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurice Washington, the director of the Michigan Athletics Career Center. We're excited to have you on to join us today as we are presenting the second installment of our workshop series entitled Drafting a Winning Resume. So why is that important? It's important because in these uncertain times that you are able to market yourself, you're able to find opportunities out there, and we're hoping that you gain some experience and some advice and some nuggets from this webinar that will really help you in going forward. I want you to understand that we are in a situation that doesn't have to be your situation, right? So this is an opportunity for you to gain momentum because we know the industry and occupations are at almost a standstill or a halt, right? And again, you have an opportunity to close the gap by gaining some experiences, and those experiences come from various different places, and we'll talk about where those experiences are coming from. On the call, I also want to introduce my staff. I have Julie Fielding, who's our assistant director, who will be moderating this webinar. I have our employee relations coordinator, Cody Riffle, who does a fabulous job at connecting and with our employer partners around the country. And thinking about employer partners, we have an awesome partner with us from Gardner. We have Katie Diesler here. So we're going to hear from Katie and her industry advice and expertise. And we have Joe Marullo. So Joe Marullo is our office and logistics manager who takes care of everything that we put together here in reaching and connecting our employers to our students and to where it makes sense. So we'll start off by Julie, lead us off.
All right. So first, it's important to understand what is a resume. Why do we have one? Why should we make one? And one of the parts of the resume is it's somebody's first impression of you. You might not be meeting somebody face-to-face or in person or having interaction via phone or whatever. So they know you by this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And so it's important that your resume is doing a great job at telling your story and making a great first impression. It's a marketing tool. When you're applying for a job, when you're applying for an internship, when you're applying for graduate or professional school, you're competing for a spot. You're competing for a job or a position. And so you want to be sure that your resume is marketing yourself as a candidate to be sure that you're in the running to secure or fulfill that role. And then it's a summary of your experiences and skills. So your resume is going over, what you've done and what you're continuing to do, and in talking through experiences, your skills, and different parts of your story that way. But you don't want to just include everything you've ever done in your life. You want to include everything you've done that's relevant to what you want to do next. And so that's a really important part is making sure your resume is streamlined for that position, that internship, that graduate school, and it's speaking to that audience. And then a highlight of accomplishments. So your resume really, when you're applying for jobs and internships, like I mentioned before, you'll see a job description. It'll tell you some of the things you'll be doing and some of the day-to-day operations that you'll have in that role. But you'll also be, contributing to that organization, to that department. And so through this, through your resume, you want to be sure that you're highlighting your points of impact. So what did you contribute? What did you improve? What result did you achieve through your performance? So making sure you're not just listing your job duties, but also highlighting and acknowledging the accomplishments and results you contributed. And then lastly, the resume doesn't get you the job, or it doesn't get you that grad school acceptance. The resume gets you the interview. So you want to be sure that your resume is catching the attention of whomever's reading it and intrigues them to want to learn more and call you in for that interview. And so what goes on a resume? So when you're drafting a resume, you want to think about the content you're building. And so if you've never built a resume, it's essentially starting as a brainstorm, right? And so trying to think about your experiences, your skills, your education, and then the resume is really compiling it and putting it all together. So, for contact information, you want to be sure to list your email address, your phone number. If you have a LinkedIn profile and want to hyperlink that on your resume as well, that's something you can include in your contact information section. Your education, so your area of study, so that would be your major, if you're double majoring, your minor, your college or university in which you're attending. and then your anticipated graduation date. And recruiters and talent acquisition team members like Katie can attest that something that's important for them is, when are you done, right? So when is your graduation date, and when can you start working for them? When can you start that internship, and what that looks like? So they're really focused on that end date, so they know when you can start adding in and would be a potential team member to add to their company. Your experience. We work with a lot of student athletes who have never worked before, so that's not uncommon. And so we help our student athletes really work on the experience section, which tends to take up at least a third of a resume, but being creative in doing so. So discussing maybe some past customer service positions, any leadership positions. So if you're a captain on a team, lead a club, anything like that. And then lastly, your athletic experience. So at the collegiate level. So in further in the presentation, we'll touch on the athletic experience and how you can highlight that, as it's important for an employer to know. Community and campus involvement. So talking about any volunteer opportunities and experiences you've had individually or with your team, and any campus activities or organizations you're involved in, whether that be within athletics or the campus as a whole. And then any relevant projects or coursework. And this is one of my favorite parts on the resume, because it allows you to be a little bit creative in, maybe you have a lack, or you feel like you have a lack of work experience, but you've had some really great and complex projects in some of your classes that you can highlight and showcase to employers, hey, I performed this way in an academic setting, and use that to dictate how you would perform in a professional setting, potentially with their company. And then any honors and awards you have. So if you have a scholarship at your institution, if you have any academic or athletic or community awards individually, and even those in a team aspect, you can highlight those on your resume as well. And I want to toss to Katie so she can touch more on that experience section and what her team at Gartner looks for in the content building.
Thanks, Julie. So for me, a lot of what a resume functions as is really my introduction to you as a candidate, and specifically the story you're going to tell me. So right when I first get that resume in person or am sent that PDF, the first thing that really strikes me is the layout. So I'm just going to use this example of a student from another university, but just the amount of text to white space is really what I want you to take away there. If a resume is really cluttered or has a lot of detail or is, really crammed full, that distracts me. That makes it hard for me to read the content. Another thing that Julie mentioned is don't downplay your course experience, right? You guys are spending a lot of time and making a really significant investment in your education at University of Michigan. You made a really good choice in coming to this university, and you're working really hard, not only on the court or on the field, but also in the classroom. So talk about those experiences, right? Just because you might not have time for an internship. I actually had a U of M athlete come to me and say, hey, look, I can't take an internship because of my training schedule. What advice do you think I have? And the student actually is taking exactly that advice. She's posting on LinkedIn. She's doing a lot of professional development and networking events, both on and off campus, taking on a lot of leadership within her particular sport. So all of those things I would expect to see on her resume, right? Whether it's a one-time event, maybe you get invited to a professional development dinner or a business etiquette dinner, put that on your resume. A lot of those higher level courses, especially like in marketing, I see universities doing a long-term project where you're partnering with a company or partnering with a corporate environment to create like a marketing plan or a business plan, or maybe you're doing an extended role play. All of those things are professional skills that you're spending time doing and really building those concrete transferable skills. For me, the other thing is, like I said, all about the storytelling. So if you even are working, let's say, as a waitress or a waiter, or in a fast food company or retail store, all of those things are really concrete and transferable skills that bring a lot to the table. And so I get students all the time coming to me saying, like, I didn't have an internship. I only worked at Walmart back, my freshman year of college. Those things matter. And so work with Julie and Cody and Mo and the team and really harness those. And like Julie said, get creative, right? Tell me why it matters. You served hundreds of customers a day. You had a really good attitude. You had a lot of customer facing experience. All of those things are things I look for every single day in students.
And just adding one other thing, it's when you do something every day, or you know your experiences like the back of your hand, right? And so it's really important to talk through those things, like Katie was saying, when you're talking to somebody about, okay, yeah, I worked at Walmart, I was a greeter, and Katie might interject, okay, so, tell me about, did you do this, or did you do this, or how many people did you see every day? It's important to kind of brainstorm with others, because you might not think something is meaningful or is important. So utilizing your resources so you can bounce off some ideas, because it will help create some great content moving forward.
And just getting to know your story more. So you'd be surprised how often I speak with students and they're kind of stumbling over their words or just not sure what to say. This is your experience, so own it, but at the same time, get really comfortable talking about it and choose what's relevant, right? There's a lot you could say about waiting tables in this. So choose what's relevant and what you think is going to be the most impactful for that particular job.
Sure, good point. I'm going to throw it to Maurice, though, to talk about experience and different kinds of experience and how to highlight that on the resume.
Great point, Julie. I think, we're looking at experiences, and as Katie said, sometimes the students will say, well, I haven't had an internship, right? And I think sometimes, students think the experiences have to come from something that's paid. It doesn't have to come from something that's paid, right? It could be volunteer experience. It could be community service experience, and really classroom experience. We heard from one of our employer partners last week from Ford that mentioned that think of all the projects that you've done, project management, program management, things you've done in your classroom, right? Think about the things that when you go home every summer that you're able to do, whether that's through shadowing, right? We can spend some shadowing opportunities if you're learning on how to do a particular job. The experience piece is where is the meat, as Katie and Julie are saying, that's really the meat at, right? Be creative in putting all that together, right? Come into our office or send us a message, or we'll send you to Katie and we'll help you craft the words, right? But you have and bring more experience than you would think, right? Also, mentioning here is a STAR method, right? The STAR method is often used when interviewing, but it's important to identify the STAR method when in referencing to your resume, and meaning the situation, the task, the action, and the results, right? Because you want your resume, I would think, Katie, I don't know, how long do you think employers spend reading someone's resume?
Oh, less than a minute, maybe. If I download that PDF, I glance it over. If there's something really interesting, that will spark my eye. But really, I look for that organization. Are there clear details? And then really that's it. That's how I decide if you're getting an interview or not.
That's a good point. The first thing I'm looking at, I'm sure that I'm looking at job titles, right? I'm looking at those action verbs, right? If I'm looking at organize large events, the first thing I see is organize, and that allows me to think, organize what? So I want to read further into, into your bullets, right? Numbers speak, right? Numbers jump off the page. We want these resumes to speak volumes. We want the words on the resume to just move and take on a life of their own, right? We want to kind of tell a story, right? Organize what type of events, large events, fundraisers, how much did you raise? What was the impact, right? What did you exceed? What are percentages? Those are just key points and things you can put on there. If you don't know exact numbers, then use the words approximate, right? We want to be true, to what we're writing, but if you don't know the exact number, that's okay. But what's more important is, and I don't think the employers really care about the exact numbers, but they want to know that you can bring value to the company, that what you have done has said that I've increased volume, I've increased participation, I've increased customer relationships. It's all about increase, right? Or if you've done something for program or project improvement, did you decrease something, right? Did you save some time? Because time is money, right? So they want to know that when they hire you, because it costs to hire, they want to know when they hire you and they bring you in that you can bring all those skills in and you're going to do the same thing for them as you've done in the past, right?
If you guys take one thing away from this slide, I want you to avoid using the word assisted as your action verb. I don't care what you helped someone else do. I care what you did, what your impact was. So those action verbs are so, so important. And if you say assisted, helped, I don't care, because that's someone else's job that got that. I want to know what you specifically did, what your impact was.
Right. And I love that word impact, because in those bullets or two, you want to show some impact as much as possible, right? Don't just tell me you did something, but tell me what was the impact to doing that, right? Again, we'll all help you do that.
And I think too, the resume just balances that fine line of being detailed, so they get a pretty vivid picture of your contributions and what you've done, but also being sure you're being concise at the same time. So not oversharing and leaving a little bit to the imagination, but still piquing their interest. So maybe, recruiters like Katie want to bring you in for the interview, but when you get to that interview, you still have parts of your story to tell, and you're just able to elaborate on the start of the story you started with your resume.
One other thing to note too is we talked about being really intentional with what you put on a resume. Your resume should only be one page, right? That's pretty well known. Just because something isn't on your resume doesn't mean you can't talk about it in an interview. If I ask a question that you think would be perfect for something that didn't really make the cut to your resume, you didn't think would be the most relevant, still bring it up. And that's also what you have a LinkedIn for. Your LinkedIn, you can have every single thing you did all the way back to your freshman year of college. Your resume, you're really going to focus on those 3, 4, 5 most relevant experience for that position.
That's a really good point too. And I think a good approach to, creating a strategic resume and something that is tailored to the job or the internship or the industry you're applying for, have a master resume that outlines and highlights everything you've done that you might want to share at some point. And then you can piece together some of those, pertinent experiences for job A versus job B, which creates that best one-page resume that you'd be submitting to that position or to that company.
Bonus points. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Bonus points if in the file name for your resume, if you write John Smith Resume Gartner, that makes me think you spent some time tailoring it for my company. So no matter, if you did or didn't, I don't know. But in theory, I like the idea that you're really spending time focusing on what you want to tell Gartner as opposed to every company you're applying to.
That's good. To Julie's point, again, I would have that other resume, right? It's easier to take things off a resume than to remember what you did, right? So as you are doing and having experiences, just jot it down on a piece of paper. Something's going to jog your memory. After a 6-week or traditional or micro internship, it's kind of hard to remember everything you've done, right? So I would encourage you every single day, when the day is over, just write some notes down and then capture that experience, right? And if it doesn't apply to the job you're applying, at least you have it. Right. And so again, it's easier to take things off than to try to think about what you've done and to put them on.
Absolutely.
All right. And so like Maurice mentioned, Cody's role is employee relations in our office. So I'm going to throw to Cody to touch on, from his perspective in working with employers. And then obviously Katie can touch and chime in. What are employers looking for? And what's that, what makes that resume stand out versus a different one?
Yeah, I definitely want to leverage Katie in this too. Some of the main things that in conversations that I've had with, especially with employers who have come to our facility or in passing conversation, I always ask, what is it you look for in a candidate? What makes them someone that could be a successful candidate at your company? And while each resume is unique, it should be catered to each company in line with the things that are interesting and the things that are valuable to the company. But really, some of the things that they consider, and I think Katie may vouch to this, what did you do? Why did you do it? What was the result? So when they're considering these things, what they're really trying to do is understand your thought process, your habits, what can you expect if you're part of my team? So when you have companies like Gartner or Ford or Microsoft, these companies with storied culture, there's a unique set of candidates that come in, walk through the doors and take on those roles. They're trying to figure out and simulate in their mind the type of people that are going to be working around them. And that's when they're talking about numbers matter and the different things you're putting on your resume are really talking about your work habits. And these are the things you can expect. These are the things that if you're interested in finance and you're in sales and what did you do? I sold 100 policies in 6 months. Why did you do it? I sold 100 policies in 6 months. In order to achieve the first year record award, whatever it is. What was the result? I achieved the reward. So it's showing you had an end goal in mind. You pursued and took the effort in order to get there. You're someone that they can expect, hey, if we put something in front of them, they're going to make sure they get it done no matter the result. No matter how many people do it, they're going to make sure they're going after it. So you're telling a story, and that's what you'll hear kind of redundantly throughout this presentation because it's so important. This is a lot of times, as mentioned, your first impression. Will Baggett is an executive leadership coach, and he had mentioned in person, they'll make a first impression of you in the first 7 seconds. And if you can imagine, if you're looking at a document without any social cues at all, it's probably a lot harder to make an impression. So to be able to write effectively and portray yourself effectively is just as important. But some of the key attributes employers want to see on their students' resumes, and Katie, I'm going to ask you to jump in here in a minute, but problem-solving skills, ability to work in a team, strong work ethic, analytical and quantitative skills, and communication skills. So a lot of things you're already doing. If you're an elite level student athlete at a Power 5 school like Michigan, these are things you've demonstrated in different capacities over the years in order to achieve where you are. So finding a way to make that a catalyst into your career, is easy, more often than not, just seeing the pattern at play. But Katie, could you speak a bit on what you guys look for a Gardner and from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything on the screen, I would say, is 100% accurate. I really like both the employer thoughts here at the top as well as the STAR method we talked about earlier. Those are things I give coaching on all the time in verbal communication. And so if you can master that in written communication, it's going to very naturally fall into the way you answer interview questions. Something I look for too, and I hire mostly for sales, is your ability to hit goals or metrics, right? So are you incorporating those numbers like we talked about earlier? In addition to maybe you raised X amount of dollars, how much was that compared to other interns in your program, right? Were you in the top 1% of interns in a national program? Or did you hit 110% of quota? Or any other sort of metrics or something that demonstrates you exceeded expectations in an internship, in a volunteer opportunity. Even as an athlete, right? Was your team ranked #1 in the conference? Great, talk about that. What does that mean for you? Additionally, I want to highlight communication skills again. One of the top reasons why I disqualify students from Gardner is what we call executive presence. So that mostly applies and is most commonly associated with the verbal communication, but your first impression, right, your resume is going to automatically give me that impression of, does this person have strong communication? If your resume is not so great and you get on the phone, maybe you'll do well, maybe you won't. That's hard to say from a piece of paper, but if you have a great resume, that automatically gets me thinking in the mindset of, this person's probably going to be a strong communicator, has really strong critical thinking skills. So every single word you put on your resume makes that impression. And if you can use that critical thinking on the front end, it sets you up for more success later on.
Good points. So we talked about, and Cody and Katie just touched on, skills and abilities that employers look for generally in candidates. And something we use in our space, it's called Marketing the Student Athlete Experience. So it's a sheet that highlights different qualities and characteristics student athletes develop by competing at their sport at such a high level, working in teams, balancing rigorous academic and athletics, but it also highlights some bullets from those that are pertinent or pertain to that key skill. So when you're talking about your sport, it's not, I scored 7 goals or I had average 13 rebounds. Those might be some important metrics if you're applying for a coaching position or something, athletically related. But when you're talking about your sport, you want to be sure that you're talking about qualities, characteristics, and skills that relate to that company, that job, and that internship and that position. So an example of that would be teamwork. So as a student athlete, you're collaborating with diverse personalities and perspectives every day, right? So if you depending on the size of your team, you could be working alongside 15 student athletes or 150 student athletes. So every day you're collaborating with, say, 50 diverse personalities and perspectives to achieve a common goal. Every day in my office, I collaborate with 7 diverse personalities and perspectives to achieve a common goal. So, that's just showcasing how what you're doing as a student athlete, there's a lot of relevance to applying that to what you would highlight if you were applying for jobs, internships, and graduate school. So making sure you're utilizing, verbiage and jargon that makes sense for the industry and to that company that you're applying for. So like Katie was mentioning earlier, they can see your potential through your written communication skills, and then bring you in for that interview that kind of draws that out of you, and you're able to articulate and speak to what you've done and how your experience as a student athlete would, make you a great sales rep or sales associate for companies like Gartner.
This is gold, you guys. You are so lucky to have this piece of paper, because a lot of people spend a lot of time and hours agonizing over these exact bullets that the team has put together for you.
So, and Katie, just kind of going back off of that, this has 12 or so skills. When Gartner is recruiting or looking at candidates, you mentioned communication. That's really important, especially for the roles you recruit for. What are some key characteristics, in your opinion, that student athletes should definitely be highlighting on a resume or even in an interview?
Yeah, so I love the confidence, the first bullet that's listed here, ability to perform in high pressure situations. Another thing to think about is that big campuses, you guys are essentially celebrities as student athletes, right? People probably recognize you on campus, especially some of those high visibility sports, basketball, football, cheerleading. You guys are really in the public eye. That's not easy to do. You're setting an example for your peers. Time management is one I ask my athletes on a lot, because you have to remain a certain level of academic eligibility. You are in a very high time demanding sport, 2 days or conditioning sessions. A lot of athletes write mandatory tutoring, of course, class group projects. Like, it's not easy to be a student athlete. And I see a lot of you also involved in other things outside of athletics too. So that's a huge skill that I think you guys downplay often as athletes, because it's something you've been doing for so long. You've just been conditioned to say, like, I got to get it done, but that's not a skill that comes easily. And so highlight that, right? Take the time to do that, as well as discipline. So teamwork, I think, is a little bit of an obvious one, still really important, but discipline is huge, right? How do you get those grades done? How do you manage your time? What do you have to say no to in order to get those priorities taken care of? That has a direct translation to any sort of corporate role, right? Maybe there's times you have to work through lunch, or maybe there's times you have to multitask in a corporate role. Maybe there's times you have to go, compete against a really difficult competitor if you're in sales, or if you have a difficult manager, right? How does that parallel to a teammate you didn't get along with but had to deal with? So thinking about those real world situations and some of those direct parallels, do the work for me, right? Tell me why it's relevant. Tell me how you've overcame that in your athletic experience.
I want to drop a quick note in here on this. Dr. Wasco is the head of our Doctors In program, which focuses on helping student athletes get into medical school. And he also does interviewing for the University of Michigan Medical School. And in talking with him, he said, when I interview student athletes, I already know, the skills you have. I want you to show me that you know that you have the skills, and that's really what this form does, is it talks to you about some of these things you're doing that are second nature to you, as Katie said. You may not even realize that you're doing something exceptional. And I think that's what is so effective about the sheet. But it's funny to see that it, goes across industry and everything else. It's very powerful.
No, definitely good points. Yeah. When you're doing something for so many years, or just it's your routine, you don't think anything of it, or you don't think it's special. So it's important to highlight that. And then just touching on formatting, Katie mentioned, ones that, balance white space well and things like that. It's very important. So you could be saying all the right things and you wordsmith your bullets and they're really impressive and you have metrics, numbers and all that great stuff. But if the formatting is off and it doesn't have a great appeal or appearance, it might not be that home run that you think it is. So, making sure your font size is legible and readable. You never know who is reading your resume or whose desk your resume is going across. So making sure that whomever is looking at it is able to actually see the words on the piece of paper. Using bold, italics, caps lock, short, small caps, and underline, because resumes can tend to be text heavy. So you want to be sure that you're doing a good job helping navigate the reader's eye through the information, right? And so you don't want that piece of paper to be stuffed or full of words and sentences. You want to be sure that you're creating this strategic roadmap as well visually to help tell your story. Simply just, making sure you're adding lines and bullets to the information under your experiences. Katie mentioned earlier, again, balancing out white space. That's really important. one of my tricks when I'm working with student athletes, I'll fold the paper in half, hot dog style, if you will, and then show them one side of the paper versus the other. And it tends to be, we read left to right. And so we tend to cram a lot of our text on the left side of the paper. And then when I usually flip the other side over, there's too much white space. And so I just use that as a test or a little eye trick to see if you are balancing out the verbiage on your resume throughout the whole sheet of paper, because that will help recruiters like Katie navigate through that piece of paper and see the great content and information. Using your judgment when it comes to creativity. Now you can incorporate colors and in a little more creative designs, but be conscious of your audience and the company you're applying to and the industry you're applying within. Is that something that's acceptable? Is creativity, innovation, forward thinking something that's important to that role? So always keep that in mind. Make sure it's organized, right? You're organizing your thoughts and experiences and information into this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Again, make sure it's easy for people to read, because you want something from somebody else. So you don't want to, you don't want your resume or the document to be challenging for somebody else to read, because probably 10 out of 10, if it's too difficult to read, they don't have the time to read that, and they're going to move on to that next resume in the file. Katie, any touches on the format that you might look for, or just tips?
Yeah, so one thing to consider is that most of the time these days you're submitting your resume virtually. So I prefer PDFs because that preserves the format that you've worked so hard to create. If you work with Julie or Cody and create this awesome resume and something is weird, maybe you created it in Pages and I have Word, I want to see the format that you intended. So save it as a PDF. As your file name, please don't make it just resume, because I have probably 400 resume on my computer. So put in first name, last name. Like I said earlier, if you put Gartner resume, bonus points for you, resume 2020, just something with your name in it so I can find it easily. And I love the point about using color. I actually used to work in the wedding industry. So my wedding industry resume looks a lot different than my Gartner resume. My Gartner one looks more like the one I showed earlier. My wedding industry one, all I did was use my text headers and I put them in pink and I put them in like a calligraphy font because that's more appropriate for the industry, right? Digital marketing, advertising, anything in like theater or communications, those are ones that you can get really creative with, right? Sales, probably not going to be as creative. Accounting, you're probably going to be more basic. So this is also just one example that I happen to have on my desk of using color. So still really black and white, really clear in the middle, although this one would fail the hot dog style test, but it has color on the top and the bottom just to make it stand out in the stack that was on my desk.
So Katie, that's a great point. I remember many years ago looking at my first graphic design resume, and it hurt my head. I was like, oh no, it's too much going on here. Right? But understanding that the resume is important depending on the industry and occupation and what you're doing. But I have a question for you, and these are some great formatting tips. Is there any particular font type to use? Because, it used to be Arial or Times, News Roman. Is there anything, that, because I've seen some resumes that come out that's really jazzy. You know what I mean? And so what would you suggest?
I would say probably stick to Arial or Times New Roman. This one that I just showed, I don't know what the font is. It's probably neither of those, but along the same lines of something basic. Again, nothing too crazy or like script or italic, unless you're applying for something where that's appropriate. And in that case, still only use it in like the headings. Your headings, if you want to change the font, I would say that's the place to do it, and leave your bullets in a more basic Times or Arial font.
And if you don't know the industry standards when it comes to resume design, ask a recruiter, ask your student athlete development office, ask people's opinion on that, because you don't want to miss the mark, having this great experience, but maybe your resume, was too creative or overwhelming. So you don't want to mess that part up, because you've done the great job and the great work of building the content, and you don't want the formatting to kind of be the hiccup in that whole process.
And I know for a fact that the MAC has resume examples from a lot of the employers that they work with. So ask. You have the answers to the test. Mo collected sample resumes from me at the beginning of the year. So you know what good looks like from these employer partners. So when in doubt, ask. Use those resources.
And then just touching on some basic resume tips, and we've talked about these, and they're, pretty common themes throughout this whole presentation, but they're very important. Again, keep it to one page. Know your experience level as you, progress in a career and you've worked for 5 or so years. Then we'll talk, and maybe you're able to jump to a 2-page. But right now in your career and where you're at, make sure that you're keeping that to 1 page. Something that's really important, we'll see a lot of people saying, I have high attention to detail, I'm really organized, but then we see, the wrong verb tenses. So they are speaking in present tense for a past position. So making sure the date listed on your resume, it correlates correctly with the verb tense you're using for your bullets. So making sure that aligns again. Quantifying when possible. So again, putting metrics and numbers to your bullets and your experiences. If I said I supervised a team, okay, I could supervise a team of 2, 3, 4, but if I say, led a team of 38 student athletes to achieve conference championship, you're going to see, oh my gosh, she dealt with 37 different personalities to achieve this amazing goal. And so when you're using numbers, the employer or the recruiter will see the level of responsibility you had through that as well, and the level of accomplishment. So definitely make sure you're quantifying when you can. And Maurice mentioned this earlier, you can use approximations. There's that great symbol on your keyboard that you can put in front of a number if you're just kind of, having a great guesstimation of that. Also, numbers are great to break up text. So if resumes become text heavy, our eye gravitates to 13 or 107. We go to that, and so it helps draw the reader's attention to really notable parts. I touched on this too earlier. Just be detailed but concise. Don't overshare or over-explain your story. Leave some information to the interview. If you've already told your entire story through your resume, when you get to that interview, you're going to have nothing more to share. The recruiter's already going to know everything about that experience, and it's going to be kind of just repetition of what they know. You want to be sure that you're adding new content and new information to that process. This one's super important. It sounds so silly and simple, but proofread and spell check doesn't count. Make sure you have a few different eyes on the document, whether that be recruiters and talent acquisition team members, your family, your roommates, your teammates, student athlete development offices, the MAC. You want to be sure that a few sets of eyes are on that resume. We're very used to how we write, and we all think that we write perfectly and there's no mistakes. But making sure somebody who's less familiar with the way you write and the way you draft sentences and your structures will help you not be removed from an application process because you had 3 typos or the sizes were different. So making sure somebody else is looking at it. And then Katie touched on it. Send us a PDF.
Sorry, I stole your thunder.
No, you're fine. It's so important. Yeah, you never know who has a Mac or a PC or Windows 2003, if that even still exists, or Word 2003, excuse me. So PDF is standard across all computer systems. And, if you're spending a lot of time too on the formatting and it looks really great and you don't PDF it, when somebody else opens it, it could look like a bit sloppy. So you want to be sure you're preserving that format as well. Any additions on this slide or anything, Katie, that you wanted to add?
One thing to break up text that I thought of that doesn't take up a lot of space is just adding horizontal lines. I don't have an example in front of me, but as those kind of like breakpoints between education and experience and involvement, you can add horizontal lines. I don't actually know how to do it in Word, but there's lots of people who can help you with that. But that's a really, really good way to make distinctions between each section without taking up a ton of space.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you need help, stop by the MAC or your career center or student athlete development office, and I'm sure that they can help you with that as well. And then some things to think about, right? So you're competing for something. And as student athletes, competitiveness is in your DNA. So when you're drafting a resume and thinking about the process, note what makes you different. If You know, if 2,000 people are applying for an internship or a job, why should that recruiter, why should they hire you? So think about that. We touched on storytelling a little bit. So think about how you can tell your story. You know, from your customer service experience when you were graduating high school to now being involved in different campus and community organizations and professional development networks. You know, paint your picture and tell your story so it's pretty vivid of the type of person that you've grown into be, and then that type of candidate that you are, and then employee or intern for that company. And then think about who's reading it, right? So again, Katie said if you add Gartner to the in the name of the file, that's bonus points. So making sure that you know who your audience is. We talked as well earlier about making sure your resume is tailored to the industry or the position or the company that you're applying for and to. So have a clear understanding of industry trends and what's, you know, some new happenings in sales and finance and engineering, and being sure that you're using terminology that connects with specific industries. And then the position and industry you're applying to, kind of just touching on what I said. And one of the tricks we like to use in the MAC are, you know, if you have a bunch of jobs and internships you're applying for and you don't have the capability or the time to make a million different resume versions, how can you make one that's speaking to maybe a broader audience but still giving that personalized feel? We love using wordclouds.com. So you can copy and paste the position requirements or job requirements from some of these postings, copy and paste those, maybe 5 or 10 of those in from different jobs or internships that you have your eye on, and then populate that word cloud, and it'll identify how many times certain words were brought up. So if I have my eye on 10 different internships and the word communication was mentioned 15 times, you better believe that the word communication should be on my resume or in my resume at least one time. So using kind of some cool tips and tricks like that, if you don't have, you know, the time or capability to make a bunch of tailored resumes, you can use some tips like the wordclouds.com to help tailor that without having to produce a bunch of different documents.
That's a really good tip, because I was going to say use the job description in your resume. You have the answer to the test. So I love the word cloud.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really great way to save yourself some time as your athlete's in busy.
And then too, with, you know, the application tracking systems, right? If you're disqualifying because of certain words or certain things that aren't included, it helps understand and note that, okay, those are mentioned in there and those were important. So absolutely. And then we'll just end with any questions, and then also just reach out. Katie mentioned, you know, utilizing, you know, her as a resource, and this is one of our passion points when it comes to career development topics and resume writing. And then Maurice, myself, and Cody are also some resources and would love to help you develop your resume, create a resume, edit, critique, review, etc. So make sure you're capitalizing and utilizing your resources. Shameless plug during this time also, follow us on social media at UMichGoMac. Lots of great information sharing, student athlete takeovers, employer testimonials and notes on what they're looking for in candidates, as well, like companies and strong employer partners like Katie and Gartner. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, go blue.
Go blue.
Go blue.
Go blue.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you,
Katie.